Thank you for joining us tonight, dear friends. Here at Tim and Tom's Film Nights, it is truly an honor to have you all with us as we delve into another fascinating cinematic adventure. Now, Timothy, I trust that you are just as excited as I am to discuss this week's film.
Indeed, Thomas, I cannot wait to share my thoughts and insights about tonight's movie with our dear viewers. We have a real treat in store for everyone, a hilarious romantic comedy called The Wedding Ringer. Now, Thomas, as you know, I am not the biggest fan of this genre, but I must say that I was pleasantly surprised by this particular film. What did you think about it?
Well, Timothy, I found it to be a rather passable way to spend a few hours. It wasn't the greatest movie ever made, but it had its moments of genuine humor and heartwarming emotion. Kevin Hart and Josh Gad certainly have great chemistry together, which made their interactions all the more enjoyable. As for my rating, I would probably give it a solid 6 out of 10 stars.
Smiling, Thomas, you always seem to find the good in everything, alas. I must confess that I did not share your sentiments about this film. In fact, I was quite disappointed with The Wedding Ringer. The plot was predictable and the characters were rather one-dimensional. I found myself cringing more often than laughing. With all due respect to my dear friend Thomas, I cannot in good conscience give it any higher than a 1 out of 10 stars.
Now, Tim, you know that we don't always have to agree on everything. While I can understand your reservations about the film, I do feel that there were some genuinely funny moments and a sweet undercurrent to the story. Perhaps it was just me, but I found myself rooting for the main characters from the beginning.
Well, Tom, we will have to agree to disagree on this one. But that's what makes our discussions so interesting, isn't it? The fact that we can offer different perspectives and still remain friends. Surprised, I suppose the question remains, would you recommend The Wedding Ringer to others who might be considering watching it?
I think, it depends on what kind of moviegoer they are. If they're looking for a light-hearted romantic comedy with some laughs and heartwarming moments, then, yes, I would recommend it. However, if they're expecting something more substantial or original in terms of plot or character development, then perhaps they should look elsewhere.
Well, Thomas, it seems that we have reached an impasse in our debate about The Wedding Ringer. But I must admit, your passion for the film does make me curious about one particular trivia tidbit that caught my attention when researching it. Did you know that the character of Ricky, played by Kevin Hart, actually had a twin brother named Bobby?
No, Timothy. I can honestly say that I didn't know that. That is quite an interesting fact. So, what did they plan on doing with these characters if the movie had been successful enough to warrant a sequel?
Well, according to some leaked documents that I managed to get my hands on, the sequel was supposedly titled The Best Men Ringer and would have revolved around Kevin Hart's character, Ricky, being tasked with finding fake fiancés for his best friends, played by Josh Gad and Kaley Cuoco-Sweeting. The plot thickens as they all find themselves in a series of hilarious mishaps during their respective wedding preparations.
Oh, Timothy, that sounds like it could have been a recipe for disaster. I'm thankful that the universe spared us from such a cinematic tragedy. But, in all seriousness, do you think there were any redeeming qualities in The Wedding Ringer?
Well, Thomas, I must admit that there were some moments where I did crack a smile or even chuckle at the antics of these characters. In particular, I thought the chemistry between Kevin Hart and Kaley Cuoco-Sweeting was quite tangible, although I'm not entirely sure if it was supposed to be that way.
Tim, you always manage to find the silver lining in even the darkest of cinematic storms. So, would you give The Wedding Ringer a 2 out of 10 stars?
Well, Tom, I think I might be a bit generous today. After reflecting on your passionate defense of the film and considering the few moments of levity it did provide. I would reluctantly give it a slightly higher rating than my initial one out of 10. Perhaps we can compromise and settle for a 3 out of 10 stars.
I suppose a compromise is better than nothing, Timothy. So, let's move on to another topic related to The Wedding Ringer. What are your thoughts on the film's soundtrack?
Well, Tom, I must admit that the soundtrack did little to elevate the overall experience of the film for me. While there were a few catchy songs sprinkled throughout the movie, they felt more like filler than integral elements of the storytelling. The most memorable track from the soundtrack, in my opinion, is Uptown Funk by Mark Ronson featuring Bruno Mars.
Ah, yes. That song was definitely a highlight during the wedding scene. But what about the film's original score? Did it add anything significant to the movie?
No, Tom, I must sadly agree with you there. The original score by Chris Peter and Steve Jocks, while serviceable, failed to leave any lasting impression on me. It was simply background noise that faded into the background as soon as the next scene began.
So, in conclusion, while The Wedding Ringer may not be a cinematic masterpiece, it does have its moments of laughter and heartwarming emotion thanks to Kevin Hart and Josh Gad's chemistry. However, the predictable plot and one-dimensional characters make it a movie best reserved for when you want something light and, forgettable to watch on a rainy day.
Well, said Tom, and with that, we have reached the end of our discussion about The Wedding Ringer. Before we wrap up today's episode, I do have one last question for our viewers. Did you enjoy this film more when it was called The Wedding Ringer? Or would you have preferred a different title altogether?
Well, Timothy, I must say that the film's title, The Wedding Ringer, did serve its purpose. It hints at the central premise of the story, a man hiring an actor to pose as his best man for his upcoming nuptials. However, if I had the opportunity to rebrand the movie with a different title, I would probably go with something more original and less cliché. Something along the lines of The Hired Fiancé, or even say, I Do. To Laughter could have been a bit more creative in my opinion. But alas, we can't change the past, can we? So, let's move on to discuss the soundtrack of this mediocre film. As you mentioned earlier, Timothy, there were a few catchy songs sprinkled throughout the movie. One song that stood out to me was Uptown Funk by Mark Ronson featuring Bruno Mars. It perfectly complemented the wedding scene where the fake groom and his posse of groomsmen burst into the church, causing chaos and laughter alike. However, aside from this memorable track, the rest of the soundtrack felt generic and forgettable. I couldn't hum a single other song from the movie if my life depended on it. But what about the film's original score? Did it add anything significant to the movie?
Well, Thomas, I must admit that the cast did bring some humor and charm to their respective roles. Kevin Hart, who played Ricky, brought his signature high energy, fast-paced delivery that always manages to elicit a few chuckles from the audience. His character's naivety and inability to resist over dramatizing situations added a layer of endearing stupidity that kept me somewhat engaged throughout the film. Josh Gad, portraying Greg, was charmingly clumsy and awkward, which made his transformation from geek to confident groom to be rather endearing. He had some genuinely touching moments with his fake fiancée, played by Kaley Cuoco-Sweeting, adding a thin layer of depth to an otherwise shallow character. As for the supporting cast, they served their purpose well, providing comedic relief and plot points when needed. However, none of them truly stood out, in my opinion. They were just there, doing their jobs, which isn't necessarily a bad thing in this type of film. But let's not forget about the one character that stole the show, Ricky's twin brother, Bobby, played by Kevin Hart again. His antics and over-the-top behavior were a welcome relief from the predictable plot points and formulaic storyline. So in conclusion, while the acting wasn't award-winning, it was passable enough to keep the movie moving forward. The chemistry between Kevin Hart and Josh Gad helped elevate some of the more mediocre scenes, and Kaley Cuoco-Sweeting did a decent job playing the reluctant participant. who eventually warms up to her role as the fake fiancée. But ultimately, it's the predictability of the plot and the lack of originality that dragged down what could have been a decent rom-com into mediocrity. Now, Thomas, I must ask you, what are your thoughts on the film's cinematography? Did they do justice to the storyline, or was it just another forgettable aspect of this forgettable movie?
Well, Timothy, I must say that the cinematography of The Wedding Ringer was serviceable but nothing particularly remarkable. It followed the standard formula for a romantic comedy, a mix of close-ups on the actors' faces. During emotional scenes and wide shots to capture the grandeur of weddings and lavish settings, the film did manage to capture some beautiful landscapes during the beach trip sequence, which added a touch of visual appeal to an otherwise average movie. However, overall, the cinematography didn't detract from the storyline, but neither did it elevate it to any great heights. Now, let's shift our discussion towards other films or TV series that have been influenced by The Wedding Ringer and its premise of a fake groom posing as someone else's significant other. One such example is the popular Korean drama, My Secret Romance, which aired in 2017. The story revolves around an introverted office worker, Kim Do-woon, played by Song Hyuk, who is pressured by his family to find a fake fiancée for their traditional matchmaking event. Enter Chae Jung-hwa, portrayed by Kim Joo-hyun, a cheerful and energetic woman with a secret past she's trying to escape from. The two reluctantly agree to pretend to be in love, but as they spend more time together, their fake feelings begin to blur the lines between reality and fiction. Another example of this trope can be found in the 2015 Bollywood rom-com Dishum, starring Varun Dhawan and Jacqueline Fernandez. The movie revolves around a wealthy businessman, played by Dhawan, who hires a beautiful woman, played by Fernandez, to pose as his fiancée for his parents' anniversary celebration. As they spend more time together pretending to be in love, their fake feelings start to turn into genuine feelings. However, both characters have secrets they're hiding from each other and the world, which eventually come to light, threatening their budding romance. In conclusion, while The Wedding Ringer may not be a cinematic masterpiece, it has certainly left its mark on the romantic comedy genre with its trope of fake relationships turning into real ones. Whether it's in Korean dramas or Bollywood films, this premise continues to resonate with audiences worldwide, providing us with countless hours of light-hearted entertainment. So, Timothy, what do you think about these other examples of The Wedding Ringer influence on popular culture? Are there any other movies or shows that come to mind that have been inspired by this classic rom-com?
Well, Thomas, while I still stand by my initial rating of 1 out of 10 stars for The Wedding Ringer, I do see some merits in your 6-star review. The chemistry between Kevin Hart and Josh Gad did manage to elicit a few genuine chuckles from me, and the predictable plot was at least executed competently. However, I still can't overlook the lack of originality and the formulaic nature of the storyline. As for other movies inspired by this premise, I would recommend The Proposal, starring Sandra Bullock and Ryan Reynolds, which takes a more dramatic turn on the fake engagement trope. Despite its cliché plot points, it manages to balance humor and emotional depth quite well. So, in conclusion, while The Wedding Ringer may not be a cinematic masterpiece, it does have moments of fleeting entertainment thanks to Kevin Hart's antics and the chemistry between him and Josh Gad. If you're looking for a lighthearted romantic comedy to watch with friends, this might be one to consider, but don't expect any groundbreaking storytelling or complex character development. And remember, folks, we love hearing from our viewers. Comment, subscribe, and hit that little bell icon to stay up to date with all our latest discussions about your favorite movies and shows. Until next time, farewell and good night.